Afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining me today. Last evening, I had the opportunity to have a quick discussion with our Prime Minister-Elect, or Prime Minister-Designate Justin Trudeau, and I'd like again to take the opportunity with all of you here to congratulate the Prime Minister-Designate on his electoral victory and the Liberal Party on their majority government. I'd also like to acknowledge and thank all of the Alberta candidates who worked tirelessly, very tirelessly, for a much longer time than usual during this election campaign as candidates and as volunteers. And no matter what your political stripes, you have demonstrated to Albertans the importance of democracy. I'm looking forward to working collaboratively with Mr. Trudeau and his party to build a strong Alberta within a strong Canada. In the coming months and the coming years, there are a number of key issues that we need to work on together. We need to build important infrastructure. We need to strengthen our healthcare system. We need to take meaningful action on climate change. And we need to develop and renew a respectful relationship with Indigenous peoples of this country. By growing our economy and protecting the environment, we can continue to make Alberta and Canada a great place to live, work, and raise a family. So I look forward to doing that work on behalf of all Albertans in their best interests in collaboration with our new Prime Minister. So thank you very much, and I'm pleased to take any questions you might have.
Premier, on the climate change front, what do you hope to hear from him now on that, particularly with the Paris talks just being around the corner?
Well, we haven't heard anything yet, but certainly our officials will be reaching out to federal officials to find out how we can work together, hopefully in advance of COP as well as afterwards. I know that the Prime Minister's platform talked about meeting with provincial partners within 90 days of COP. I'm hopeful that we're able to do some of that in advance. I look forward to being able to contribute to a positive alliance that will serve Canada well in that international forum.
Premier, what happened to the NDP federally last night? Were they an anti-Mulcair vote, or was this a stampede to anyone but Harper count?
Well, I'm really gonna leave most of that to the pundits. I'm more focused on going forward in terms of the job that I have to do. I will say that certainly a majority of Canadians did appear to vote for a platform that talked about protecting and properly funding healthcare, about investing in infrastructure, about taking action on climate change, and about renewing our relationship with Indigenous Canadians. And so with that, there are definitely a tremendous amount of overlap with the position that our government has taken, both in the last election as well as more recently. And I look forward to being able to make real progress on those issues with the new government.
You campaigned for Mr. Mulcair the final week. You made a speech in Calgary, you were at a rally. It didn't make any difference at all, it seems. How do you feel about that? You went up there and put your name on the line and it didn't help. Well,
I think in some ways you almost said it today. I mean, I'm a New Democrat. I've always been a New Democrat, and as I also said at the beginning of this campaign, my focus was to work on being the premier of the province and to work on the many issues that we have facing us. So that's what I've done. But I felt that it was important to participate in what little way I could, and so I did, because I've been a New Democrat all my life, and I always will be. That being said, Albertans made different choices, and I actually agree very much with former Prime Minister Harper that the voters are always right.
Yeah, I was wondering, though, if you thought the Liberal platform was more like your platform. You had more in common with the Liberals than you did with your own federal cousins.
I think, again, you could pull pieces from any of the platforms. At the end of the day, I think going forward, there's a good opportunity for our province to work collaboratively with the federal government on some key files. There may be ones where we don't necessarily ultimately agree. We'll have to see. And in those cases, I will represent the interests of Albertans because that's what's my job.
Which files do you think you won't be agreeing on?
I'm not saying there are any, but what I am saying is that our job is to represent Albertans in the federal level, and that's what I look forward to doing.
What do you need to hear on the energy file, specifically on pipelines?
Well, I think that there's some common cause there. Mr. Trudeau has talked about the need to diversify our markets, and of course, I've spoken about the need to diversify our markets. And so, I know our energy minister is looking forward to the opportunity to work with the new federal energy minister on that file, because as I've said before, not only does that benefit Albertans, but it benefits all Canadians. Alberta is an economic driver for the whole country, and there's no question that that is a position that our energy minister will take to Ottawa always, and that I will certainly represent at every opportunity when the First Ministers convene.
Do you see any friction there with focus on different pipelines?
No, not at all.
Let's go to Matt and then to Paul, and then we're going to go to the phones.
Premier, how would you respond to criticism that the last night's results show that Albertans aren't in favor of NDP policies and ideology?
I really think that in any election, for different levels of government, voters will vote for the leaders who are in front of them at that time and the issues that are before them at that time. It's no question that in Alberta, many voters voted for a leader they knew. And that's great. I am also a leader that they know, and my job going forward is to represent Albertans as effectively and as thoroughly as I can on the federal stage, and that's the message that I take out of last night's results.
Premier, can you expand on what you'd like to see from the federal government on healthcare? You haven't talked about healthcare much since you became premier, except in the context of the federal government. Is it a money issue, or what exactly are you expressing?
Well, we need to have a renewed healthcare agreement with the federal government with some, long-term consistent funding and that we can rely on. And so the previous accord had expired, and that is something that needs to be negotiated. And so we're looking for the kind of support that will ensure that the health needs of Albertans are properly addressed. We are a young province, but that actually brings with it health challenges which might be a bit different from other places. So we're certainly hopeful that we see a per capita funding model that continues, and perhaps where the funding is increased, because we know it's a challenging area of work that we do. And as you know, Alberta itself is in a bit of a fiscal crunch, and so whatever support we can get from the federal government will be incredibly welcome.
Okay, Dean, and then we'll go to the phone.
Premier, can you, it's a day later, can you assess the Stephen Harper 10 years? How has he left Canada?
Again, so maybe that's not pundits, that's more historians. I think at this point, I'm going to be more focused on what my job is going forward, and I'll leave that to some other people to offer up those opinions.
What do you think of the campaign you ran?
Pardon me?
What do you think of the campaign you ran?
That I ran?
No, that he ran.
Oh, that he ran. Well, I think, yeah, I mean, I believe that as much as possible, it's important to try to run a positive campaign that brings voters together. And I'm pleased that that seems to have been the ultimate outcome.
We're going to go to the phones now. Operator, are there any calls on the line?
Your first question comes from the line of Don Braith of Calgary Herald. Your line is open.
Premier, you may be, one would speculate, glad to be rid of Harper because he had created a toxic environment, not just with you, but with the Premier of Ontario as well, with the direct attacks on your party and your government and your performance. Do you feel, perhaps I can coax you into at least acknowledging you feel a degree of relief that he's not still the Prime Minister?
Well, what I can say is that I believe both Mr. Mulcair and Mr. Trudeau, the Prime Minister designate, ran on a platform of working more collaboratively with First Ministers and re-engaging that relationship between First Ministers and the federal government. And so I look forward to that, and indeed that was one of the topics that Mr. Trudeau and I touched on last night when we spoke. So what I will say is that I very much look forward to ensuring that as a Premier of one of Canada's 10 most important provinces, 11 most important provinces, that I look forward to being able to ensure that our issues are well represented on the national level.
Operator, can you put it the next caller?
Surely you must feel some relief that you don't have to deal with the aftermath of all that rancor.
Don't call me Shirley, yeah. Pardon me?
Sorry, he asked you a question.
You know, I just really, it's not really for me. I'm not gonna look back and, you know, the election is over, people campaign the way they campaigned. Politicians in the heat of a campaign will say certain things and do certain things. At this point, my job is to move forward, working collaboratively with the people who are in power. And quite frankly, there are a number of Conservative MPs who represent Alberta as well, and there may be times that we have to work together to represent Alberta's interests. And so that's what I'm going to focus on, is ensuring that we maintain the relationships that allow us to represent Alberta's interests in the way that I think reflects the direction Albertans want us to go in. And so that's going to be my focus.
Operator, can you put through the next caller?
Your next question comes from the line of Tara Weber with CNN. Your line is open.
Good afternoon, Premier. I'm just wondering, Justin Trudeau has said he supports the proposed Keystone XL pipeline, something you've said in the past that you clearly don't. How do you plan to work with him on this and move forward?
Well, you know, as I've said before, our focus with our government is to expand our access to markets in a way that allows us to maintain as much flexibility and economic room, shall we say, as possible to enhance upgrading where possible in our province. So I've talked about the pipelines that I'd like to see us move forward on, and I know that Mr. Trudeau agrees in principle on those pipelines. And so we're going to sit down and talk to his folks about those pipelines, and we'll see where we go from there.
Does he also support upgrading in Alberta?
You know, I'm not 100% sure of that, but you would think that most folks who are wanting to increase the number of jobs and do job creation would certainly be interested in having more jobs created, at least in Canada, if not in Alberta. But we're going to make the point that it should be in Alberta.
Operator, are there any more calls on the line?
Yes, your next question comes from the line of Eva Ferguson with the Calgary Herald. Your line is open.
Premier Notley, you talked about the importance of infrastructure investment, and I'm wondering what your priorities are around that. Specifically, we know just in southern Alberta alone, up to $1 billion is still owed from the federal government for flood mitigation. Is that a priority, or can you talk about others?
Well, there's no question that flood mitigation is a major issue. It's an issue that I actually raised with the former Prime Minister when we met last summer. And not only flood relief, but also flood mitigation efforts. There's major investment requirements on that one. We of course, are also very interested in supporting the call that our municipalities are making for their infrastructure requirements, particularly as it relates to public transit. And then, of course, you know, I mean, we have a very, very long list of infrastructure priorities that we'll be working on as well. So we'll be coordinating with the federal government on those issues, but without question, they will hear about flood mitigation very quickly, because it's outstanding and it's not the kind of thing you want to wait on.
Okay, there's 2 more calls on the line, and then we'll come back to the floor for a couple follow-up questions. Operator, can you put through the next caller?
Your next question comes from the line of Ryan Tamilky with Metro Edmonton. Your line is open.
Yeah, Premier, I'm just wondering if you're concerned at all about maybe not that much representation in government from Alberta MPs. It looks like we'll have 3 or 4 Alberta MPs who are part of the government caucus. Do you worry about Alberta not having a strong voice at the cabinet table?
You know, I mean, of course, none of the cabinet for the new government has been appointed yet, so it might be a bit premature. But, you know, as I say, we're certainly going to do all that we can as a provincial government to hold the new Prime Minister to his word, which I don't think is going to be terribly difficult, that to reinvigorate the First Minister's process to ensure that we can meet regularly with the Prime Minister about issues that are important to Alberta. And I think through that forum, we'll be able to achieve a lot of success. And after that, you know, we'll see who ends up in cabinet and go from there.
We have one last call from the line, and then we'll come back to the floor. Operator, can you put through the next call?
Yes, your next question comes from the line of Jeremy Van Loon with Bloomberg News. Your line is open.
Premier, I'm just wondering where you do have alignment with Trudeau on pipelines. I'm just wondering what would be some of the differences in terms of the way that you would cooperate with the federal government in order to get some of those done that have been different from the past, and how would you handicap the various pipelines that are in play for being completed in the next couple of years?
Well, I think that's a little bit complex and might be asking me to make a few assumptions prematurely. But you know, as I've always said, I think that one of the key things that we can do as a province that I think will have more support for from the federal government is to ensure that we do our homework in terms of our environmental record and our climate change strategy, because that way we can then talk in other jurisdictions about sort of that issue of social license and ensuring that people see the economic benefits of our export, and that they're not lost in a different discussion. So I think that there's probably more opportunities to work collaboratively with this government on that. And then, you know, as I say, I really don't want to prejudge the conversations, but we will be very enthusiastically reaching out to their new energy minister and their new environment minister to talk about the processes that they see unfolding with respect to energy export infrastructure and pipelines.
Premier, one of the main planks in Mr. Trudeau's platform was that there'd be a new tax bracket for Canadians making over $200,000 a year, be 33%. And the disproportionate number of people earning that are Albertans. Have you had to rethink your budget in any way because of Mr. Trudeau's victory?
We have not gotten to that point, no. You know, our budget, I mean, no. Is the answer to that question. I mean, generally speaking, no. I mean, you know, for the longest time, we were the only province in the country without a progressive tax system. Generally speaking, I believe that a progressive tax system is the fairest way to fund our public services. I believe that most Canadians want to see our public services responsibly, stably funded, and that that is best done through a progressive tax system, which also contributes ultimately to less inequality and more economic activity. So that being the overarching theme, you know, there are much more progressive tax systems in other jurisdictions than in ours, and so I don't see us having a necessarily negative outcome on it relative to other jurisdictions in the country.
You talk a lot about market diversification these past few months, market access also. Now the election campaign is over, what are your thoughts on the TPP?
You know, my thoughts remain exactly as they were, that as a lawyer, I'm not going to say yay or nay to something where I haven't read the fine print. And unfortunately, we were to have received the fine print, but we haven't yet. And so it's something that we really, really need to see it, and then it needs to be thoughtfully evaluated for the intended as well as unintended consequences, and then debated on its merits. So really, it's one of those things where it's so broad, we really need to see the details.
There's a story out today about the RCP are aware of some threats against you on social media. I was wondering if I can get your response to some of these threats online. And do they come to you, or is it through security?
Well, we, you know, I have a security unit, and they, as a matter of course, take a look at those issues and keep an eye on them. And I'm told that none of what has occurred thus far with me is in any way, shape, or form out of the ordinary. And so I rely on them to do their job, and I'm very confident that that's what's happening.
So is this just a part of being premier in this day and age?
I think it's a part of being premier probably in almost any day and age, and it is what it is, but it's, you know, politics is politics.
Okay.
People have opinions.
Paul, you can ask the last question, and then we have to go.
Great, thanks. What's your position on the legalization of marijuana?
I have yet to canvass that fully in my caucus, so I'm going to honestly say that it's a federal issue and it's not my #1 priority. And, you know, we'll see how that unfolds and look at it if it becomes a pressing issue.
Thanks, guys.
Okay. Okay, thanks.